Hello, I'm Professor McCoy, and today I want to talk about the doctrine of divine conservation, or continual creation. This is a classically theistic doctrine, especially within Christianity, and especially within the scholastic tradition, say, of the Middle Ages, culminating in St. Thomas Aquinas. And it's the doctrine that that creation is a single act of a simple God. In other words, it's somewhat inappropriate to say that God created the world in the past tense. Rather, it's best to say that God creates the world in something like the present tense. Of course, even any tensed language, whether it's present or past tense, is imprecise for this, because God, having created time, is beyond time, isn't set within this sequence of events that we experience as part of the world. Now, there are a lot of metaphors and there are a lot of ways of looking at this that might help to clarify the situation, but I think one of the best is J.R.R. Tolkien's creation myth, which is the music of the Ainur, or the Ainulindale, as depicted in the Silmarillion. This is Tolkien's mythological text. This is the sort of mythic or mythopoetic backstory to the world we see in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, his more conventional novels. It's written entirely in the style of ancient myth, of epic poetry, rather than as a straightforward narrative or as a novel. And so the first chapter of this book is titled The Music of the Ainur, or the Ainulindale. The Ainur being the foundational spirits of the world, something analogous to angels in Christian mythology. And so this Ainulindale is very much a parallel, although with, of course, very different elements. It is a parallel to the biblical book of Genesis, being this creation myth where the single God, Yahweh in the Christian version, which is essentially the same as the creator called Eru, or the One, as depicted by Tolkien, creates all of reality, beginning with these spirits, which are the Ainur, the angels, which then contribute to the creation of the world as we know it, Ea, that which is. So this process of creation, I think does a very good job of depicting a Creatio Continua, a continual creation, a divine sustenance or maintaining of the world. And it does this by the use of musical imagery. Hence the Ainulindale is the song or the music of the Ainur, which is the act or the process being a bit of a stretch, but the act of creation of the world. So how does this go? If you're not familiar with the tale, I'll put a link to a condensed version and as full a version as I can safely put due to copyright reasons, as full a version as I can of this tale in the description. So hopefully you can find that and you can give it a read, because it is, I think, one of the best pieces of mythic poetry or epic poetry that I've found, at least outside of the Bible, and it is in a lot of senses true, in a way, which we'll explore. In what ways it speaks to real truths, even though it's fictionalized mythology. So how the account goes is that Eru, the One, in creation of Ea, that which is, first creates these spirits or powers called the Ainur. Something like God creating the angels. And then these Ainur, these spirits, are each given an insight into part of the mind of the One, and they're given the spark of the flame imperishable, to the spark of life, the spark of divine life, this creative power of the One. And with this insight into the mind of the One, and with this creative spark, they begin to work together. And when they're given first by Eru this theme, a theme to the world, which is depicted as a musical theme, a basic musical theme that each one of them contributes to in harmonious ways. Now there's a conflict that arises with one, the greatest of the Ainur, named Melkor, who introduces discord into this melody by wanting to create of his own accord rather than through the will of the One, through the will of Eru. But ultimately, which this is less relevant to our point here, but ultimately, even this discord is brought back into the full development of the music, whether it's through the will of Eru, through the will of the One, and in combination with the harmony produced by the other Ainur. So this is a lot to take in. The important thing to note is that through each of these themes that Eru, the One, propounds, that then the Ainur expound upon, there are several, each representing different things, etc. Through each of these, it is the music that both creates the world and represents the world that is created. Right? And it's the representation that I want to focus on, because by representing the created world, music is, I think, a wonderful symbol for the world that is created by God through this this singular act of creation. Now, music is necessarily temporal. Right? It is a sequence of sounds through time. However, this is depicted in Ainulindale as being before the beginning of time. Right? So this is without any kind of time being present. So there isn't a temporal sequence of one thing after another, except perhaps the sequence of logic. This thing logically precedes that thing. This isn't a music in a sense of one note leading to the next, to the next, to the next, but rather it's a harmony that is produced between independent but cooperating wills. Right? So this is the harmony that's produced. This is the music of each of the music produced in accord with each of these themes. And it's something to note that in music, it's something to note how music is produced from the musician. And this is something I've mentioned in other lectures, is that the music depends upon the musician in an essentially ordered way. And there will be a link in the description to something about what that means. But the short version is that if the musician stops playing the music at any point, the music stops existing. There's no longer any music, right? But we don't say that the musician plays and then the music appears. That isn't the process. This isn't a temporal sequence of cause and then effect, but rather it's the cause continually producing the effect. This is analogous to Creatio Continua, God's continuing act of creation, this action of creating all of being. Of course, the analogy is imperfect because we, any human musician, is going to be in time. We're temporal. We pass from past through the present into the future. This is different from an atemporal God, or even the atemporal Ainur, those Tolkien spirits that exist before the created time. So, how does this analogy fit? Well, there's a subsequent part to the Ainulindale, this opening chapter of the creation myth, where it isn't merely that the Ainur sing the world into being. It's not merely the song of the Ainur, But then subsequent to that is the vision of Ea, the vision that Eru, the One, shows to his angels, the Ainur. He shows them the world that their song has created. And it is all in a glimpse. It's a single outlook at this world that their music has created. And it was this music that brought it into being and sustains it in being. All of this is before, so to speak, before anything happens, before time begins. So all of being, all of creation, this harmony of the music of the Ainur, which is created and sustained and produced by their harmonious actions, and then the vision of that which is, that's presented by God, by the One in this case, all exists without there being any temporal sequence. All of it simply is, right? So by it simply being, we can see that this is a single act of creation. This is analogous to, say, the Christian or classically theistic point of view, that since God is altogether simple, there are no parts, there's no sequence, there's no this and then that, there's no different pieces working together in God. This act of creation of all time, since God is responsible for the being of everything, this act is a simple, singular act that creates and sustains all of reality. God, being outside time, doesn't just begin the sequence of temporal events, but creates all of it in a single act. This is like the song being created by a single harmony. The song, the music of the Ainur, being created by a single harmony, and the vision of the Ainur, this vision of the world, all being present at once, before time begins. And only then is the world brought into being, entered into, and time, this sequence of cause and effect and thing after thing, only then does that occur. It occurs, we might say, logically following this initial act of atemporal creation. Only once everything is brought into being, then do we have temporal sequence. Okay. But then, how do we explain things causing other things within the created world? Right? Because if everything is caused initially by this single act of creation, or what we might have in the case of the Ainulindale, if everything is only a part of this eternal song, then how does one thing in the world cause another? How does, for instance, my speaking cause a recording in the camera? And then how does that recording cause the video to display on your screen? Right? And how does that cause you to understand things? How does this obviously temporal sequence, how are these causal links real if all of it is the result of a single creative act? Right? If all of it is part of this song of creation, so to speak. Well, this is the other part of the analogy we can look to. Because it's important to note, in the creation myth, in the Ainulindale, after the world comes into being, after Ea, that which is made real, some of the Ainur, called the Valar, those powers of the world, some of them enter into creation. Right? So just as, say, the angels in Christian mythology will enter into creation as divine messengers, etc., these Valar, some of the Ainur, enter into the world and then participate in the events just as any other temporal creature would. So it's this interplay in the world, right? So the Valar not only were responsible for creation in this initial atemporal timeless act, but are then responsible for elements within creation that they immediately manipulate in the same way that I manipulate the sound waves that are going to the camera, which I then upload, which then you watch, right? It's the same kind of causal sequence as that. It's this accidentally ordered causal relationship, rather than this singular act of creation. But how can these be compatible? How can both of these manners of causality both exist side by side? Well, it may be useful to note that the same Valar who interact with the world in Tolkien's mythology are also responsible for the creation and the creation of the harmony which is the world. They both act initially, they act atemporally to create the entire world, and they also act within it, within the world in ordinary temporal causal sequences. What this tells us is that there's no contradiction between these two kinds of causality. Well, how? Maybe we can use another example, using a sort of meta example of Tolkien. So I mentioned the character of Melkor being the most powerful of the Ainur, who turns against Eru, the One, in order to, out of a desire to create of his own accord, not wanting to follow the design and harmony of the rest of the Ainur, or not wanting to follow the design of the creator. Right? He's the Satan figure of this mythology. So we can ask the question, why does Melkor turn against Eru, or turn against the One, or turn against God? Well, there's a simple and straightforward answer. Right? Because Tolkien wrote it that way. Right? Because that's how he wrote the story. But that doesn't answer the question fully. And that probably doesn't answer the question the way we had intended it. Right? We intended to ask the question about what were the characters' motivations. Why did Melkor turn against Eru? It was out of a desire. It was out of a kind of pride, a desire to implement his own will rather than someone else's. We can speak of that. We can say that these were his desires. This is what he wanted. This is why he did it. And we can intend that very seriously. There's no need to equivocate when we're saying, why did he do it? Well, on the one hand, it's because of these reasons, right? Because of his pride and his desire for power, etc. And on the other hand, we can say, well, because that's how Tolkien wrote it. Both of these are completely true, but they're true in radically different senses. Right? They're true by analogy. Right? There's an analogy between why on the one hand and why on the other. But it's clearly not the same kind of causality, right? Because one is, so to speak, from outside. One is what causes the narrative itself, what causes the narrative, which is the author. And then on the other hand, the other question is, what causes each event within the narrative to happen within it, right? Within the narrative, what's the internal causality going on here? Right? And to say that there was an author doesn't negate the fact that there's a story. In fact, both are necessary, both are required, and both are needed to make sense of what's going on. And so if we posit that there's an author of reality, whether that's within the story that Tolkien writes, whether that's Eru, the One, or whether this is in the Christian mythological framework, that this is God who creates the world, creates and sustains all of reality, however we want to say it, if there is something like an author, then there's something like a story. And it's true both that the story is the way it is because the author writes it. But it's also true that the story is the way it is because these characters within it have done these various things. So both of these can coexist. They can both occur. And it's the creation, this singular act of creation, this atemporal act of creating all of reality, that confers this secondary causal power. It's this primary cause of God, which allows creatures to cause in a secondary sense. Because it's the act of creation from the start this singular act of creation, which creates the causal powers and creates the causes within the world, as well as just creating all the events and all the things. The causal networks and the causal paths within the world are also brought into being. A way of looking at this as well, going back to the analogy of the Ainulindale. Eru is solely responsible for creation of the world, right? In this mythological framework, God is the only creator, just like within the traditional Christian framework. However, Eru creates the Ainur, the powers, the spirits. And then they sing the world into being, expounding on Eru's themes. How's this possible? Eru is solely responsible for creation. The Ainur are responsible for creation. It seems we have a contradiction, but that's not the case. Eru creates the Ainur, which then perform this action which he allows them to do of, say, subcreation. God creates the whole of reality through subsidiary powers. Now, even though this is the case, it's no less true that Eru is entirely responsible for all being, and is even responsible for, in a sense, for the elements of the music that Melkor brought in, that he attempted to bring in from his own will. Because where does Melkor's will come from? Solely from Eru. Right? Melkor is only partially, is only given reality, given being through the act of the creator. And so, that which Melkor creates is part of Eru's ultimate design. He tells him as much, and this is part of, this is one of, I think, one of the greatest little pieces in here, wherein Eru speaks directly to Melkor. It says, "Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor. But that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar," that is, the bringer of light. "Those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see that ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined." What it's saying here, what Iluvatar is saying, what Eru Iluvatar, the creator, is saying to Melkor, is that, yes, you've created something, but you only have that power of creation through me. So this act that you do is my act of creation mediated. It is truly the actions of creatures, the free, self-created actions of free, real creatures. Whether those are Ainur, angels, human beings, elves, what have you. Right? These actions are real. They are really from the creatures that make those actions, that make those choices. And they really do have consequences, right? My speaking really does produce sound, right? And my uploading really does produce a YouTube video. But at the same time, any action that I produce, any causal power that I have, is derivative. It's derivative from the singular act of creation, which is ultimately responsible not only for those things which happen, but for the causal powers that secondarily cause things, right? Any given event in the world. So hopefully this has helped to provide some examples to clarify a probably fairly obscure doctrine within Christianity and, in fact, within most classically theistic faiths. That is this doctrine of Creatio Continua, or divine sustenance. It's a difficult thing to wrap our heads around, but I think this example of music, and this example of the vision, and this example of primary and secondary causal powers, this sustaining power, this initial creative power, and then this sequential causal power within the world, and how these fit together perfectly and don't conflict with one another, can really help us to understand the doctrine of creation in the Christian context in general. So with that, I hope that clarifies this complex issue, and I will see you next time.